Okay, great. Great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to one of the last panel discussions for the Sustainable and Inclusive Internationalization virtual conference. My name is Isabelle Lavarche-Chiasson, and I work at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO as the Education Program Officer, and I will be chairing this panel. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded territory of the Algonquin people on Turtle Island, which is now known as Canada. And I think it's important to acknowledge because while we're currently online, it's still important to remind ourselves that we're still physically grounded in a specific place and time on this planet Earth. And I'm very grateful to be connecting with you virtually and the use of technology to do this. But I also want to acknowledge that I'm in snowy Ottawa, where I still have access to this land and trees and water and nature all around me that keeps me sustained, even during this pandemic and during this lockdown. So the theme of this panel today is on the use of technology and digital learning and whether we can leverage these experiences abroad online. I think this theme is quite relevant, thinking about where we are right now in 2021. Amidst a global pandemic, COVID-19 has and still is creating a world crisis in education. This past spring, more than 1.6 billion children and youth in 188 countries, that's over 91% of the world's student population, were affected by school closures. It's really an unprecedented situation in the history of education. And many school systems, teachers, students, and parents were tossed into it without the planning of technology to make it work properly. Countries were, and to be honest, or still are today, racing to come up with distance learning solutions. And there's a broad spectrum of that, thinking of a range from educational radio and TV shows to virtual classrooms. But as educational institutions around the world roll out tech-based solutions, it's also super important and very relevant to think that we don't forget students that are most at risk and are the ones to fall further behind. UNESCO, which stands for the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, it's a specialized UN agency responsible for the education sector and the monitoring and coordination of the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is quality and inclusive education for all. So UNESCO responded during the pandemic by launching a Global 19 Global Education Coalition. And the purpose of this was to help countries share best practices with one another and also to ensure that we were reaching at-risk children and youth and to monitor school closures, develop distance learning solutions and recommendations, including technical assistance and also some international partnerships in areas like Latin America and Asia Pacific, which we'll be hearing from today. So I'll be honest by saying that I personally have some reservation for online learning or whether it can really replace in-person experiences. As I personally support my son and my kids in online learning, I realize it's very challenging, particularly for younger kids without adult support. I know there's a difference with higher education, but I still do believe in its immense potential. I just have a caveat about that. And we even have experienced that at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. We have a UNESCO Schools Network where with our partners from Taking It Global and the Center for Global Education, we were able to engage students from over 40 different countries to collaborate in co-creating and co-writing a youth climate action paper for the UN Climate Change Conference. So I think there's so many examples like that and so much potential. So I'm very excited to learn more from our panelists today, from their experiences and how they have leveraged technology to create better learning opportunities for their students. So our first panelist will be Dr. James C. Simeon, Associate Professor from the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies at York University. And he will be co-presenting with Professor Itzel Barrera de Diego from the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, as well with Vania Ramírez-Camacho, my apologies for name pronunciation, also from the same institute in Mexico, and then Professor Hugo Cahueñas, also from the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. I'm so excited to hear about this collaborative presentation, and this will be followed by Della Burke from the Jesuit University of Guadalajara, Mexico, and lastly we'll hear from a colleague in India, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, Secretary General from Association of Indian Universities. So each panelist will get 10 minutes each. We invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves, to put comments throughout the conversations, to have questions, and then of course we will follow up with a Q&A, which I'll have some questions as well, but definitely looking for your engagement and your participation. This is supposed to be an online learning experience, so we're going to try to model that. So definitely encouraging you to be as active as you can online. So now I will pass it to the first panelists.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Isabel, I wonder if you could show our video.
I will ask our tech team, which are behind the scenes, to help us with that.
We have a common global issue that we're examining from the perspective of students in 3 different countries. For me, it was what we call a globally networked learning course, or a GNL. And what that means is essentially that universities partner together.
As a student, we always try to enrich our education, and the opportunity to bring different people from different diverse backgrounds together to work on an issue that is actually so complex and international, it just makes sense.
Tuvimos la oportunidad de participar con la Universidad de York en Canadá y una universidad en Ecuador, Quito. Y fue muy innovador poder participar con estas personas, entender su punto de vista y poder compartir nuestras opiniones sobre un tema pues tan global como la diversidad.
Tuvimos que, pues uno, conocer a nuestros socios, saber cuáles eran sus expectativas, cuáles eran los objetivos de sus clases y lograr un tema común. Creo que algo importante fue cómo visualizamos las actividades que realizarían los estudiantes, que les permitirían, uno, conocerse, tener la oportunidad de interactuar, pero también de discutir, de investigar sobre este tema que es tan importante pues para los 3 países. En nuestro caso, la invitación a un especialista en temas de inmigración fue algo que consideramos que iba a darle mucho valor.
Fue una gran experiencia. Por un lado, analizamos un problema de carácter global y por otro, en términos personales, se rompieron las fronteras por medio del trabajo en grupos.
Aprendes cómo manejar un equipo.
So muchas gracias, but we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. I wonder if you could put up my PowerPoint, please. And as that's being done, perhaps I can start. This globally networked learning collaboration came together last August, and it came under the fostership of York University's GNL initiative and program. Could you please go to my next slide? And it involved actually 3 universities, as you can see from the video,
Tech, USFQ, and York University. And it involved not only the 3 countries, but 4 actually courses. And we engaged in 2 joint sessions during the fall term, and we're planning a 3rd one. So as Isabel indicated at the outset, with the pandemic and the lockdown of universities across the world, I, for example, personally, but I think my colleagues as well, were looking for something a little different. And because everything had pivoted to online instruction, I was looking for a new kind of pedagogy, or at least a new experience, and this collaborative experience was certainly part of it. So this is really, I think, perfect for online delivery modes where you're involving instructors. And in our particular case, we've had actually 6 different instructors, 6 different courses, and we've engaged at least 150 students, and some of the students, particularly those at York University, have engaged in more than 1 session. And this is really a proven method by which you can engage students in a common experiential learning experience. And it's actually, in that sense, then risk-free. It's very cost-effective because with the new digital technologies, of course, it becomes not only affordable, but it becomes practical. And the bottom line really is our students really like it. We get lots of positive feedback in terms of this kind of engagement. And that, I think, all underscores the point that it's actually quite sustainable in itself. And in terms of internationalizing the curriculum, it's designed around the needs of the 3 universities because our sessions aren't completely aligned, so we have to adapt and modify things, but it meets the requirements of the 3 universities. And it's fully collaborative between not only the administrators at the institutions, but of course also the instructors. And we're focused on meeting the needs of our students. So I think it's a classic example of how to internationalize your curriculum. Next slide, please. And it really has a number of tangible learning benefits, both for instructors and students itself. And this is irrespective of the informal learning that takes place in this kind of a full collaboration. I've got very limited time, so what I'll do is really focus on, I think, 2 of the core tangible learning benefits that arise. For the instructors, I really see this as it forces you, when you do this kind of collaboration, you do it properly, it forces you to be open to new ideas, new ways of doing things. And I think that's really one of the strengths of this kind of collaboration, this kind of GNL. For the students, it clearly promotes the students' cultural awareness as well as sensitivity. We have the students working together both asynchronously and synchronously. And by doing that, I think it makes it a more inclusive kind of experience for everyone that's involved in all of the courses and in all of the students. It furthers the individual and collective learning needs and objectives and outcomes for everyone who's involved in the collaboration. And the last thing I want to touch upon is that it's really the keystone of this collaboration is constant improvement, because we learn from each of the joint sections. What we try to do is enhance those sessions to improve the learning experience of our students. And I'll end it there and pass it on, I think, to Vania, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I feel really honored today and to share the floor with my colleagues and with the audience, and to be able to share one of the most insightful experiences in my academic life. A common objective, innovation, and the need to provide students with a meaningful and unique learning experience was extraordinary opportunity for cross-cultural collaboration for both faculty and students. Our preparation required us to hold several meetings via Zoom, where we get to know each other and discuss expectations, learning objectives, pedagogy, and technological tools. We started our planning sessions at the beginning of August, and we implemented its first version by in mid-September. Several were the challenges that we met. For instance, we had to grapple with different course schedules, course structures, not to mention the number of students, as James mentioned, and the varied profiles. How could we guarantee that this was not just an extra element pasted in our course syllabus? For us, it would have to come as a natural and a distinct and integral component of our different courses. Despite these challenges, the results and the benefits achieved far outweighed them. We co-developed a combination of synchronous and asynchronous activities where the use of digital tools to create collaborative environments and engage students with competences that will build for the 21st century. The institutional support provided by the Short-Term Mobility Office of Tec de Monterrey was central for the design of a web platform which that was created specifically for this collaboration. It was a tool that allowed us to bring together all the material of the GNL Global Week, material. Its objective, its faculties, activity, resources, and accompany the students through the journey. And now I will give Dr. Hugo Cahueñas to continue sharing the materials that we use.
Hello, everyone from the middle of the world, Ecuador. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to my colleagues for all this experience. I'm going to refer about the students' responses to the GNL task and their perceptions of their own skills development and learning outcomes. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the Padlet wall, which is a website that allows to interact the groups and the students. Thank you, Itzel. As faculty, we formulate questions for each session, and each team publishes its responses in Padlet wall. Also, the teams have to comment on 2 other teams' answers on Padlet. What is important to say is that all the teams participate in Padlet. I have prepared a very short video, 1-minute video, which summarizes the main ideas and conclusions about the use of Padlet during this experience. Could you please share the video that I prepared? Just 1-minute video. Thank you so much. Panha, could you please, I don't know who has to show the video, which summarize the main conclusions. Thank you so much.
76% of the students considered that Padlet was an effective way to share the team's responses and learn about the other responses. Nevertheless, after the first session, due to the variety of programs, the faculty realized that the students would like to have more questions related to their study field. In the second session, the question that more groups answer and comment was the one that allowed them to propose actions from their standpoint to improve refugees' situation. For instance, the response that more comments received highlighted the importance of engineering systems in refugee camps. Moreover, this team also underlined the protection of refugees through international law. On the future, we should encourage more interaction in Padlet, including more discussion from students' study field view.
Thank you. Yeah, the main conclusion from Padlet, the use of Padlet, is that we should encourage the interaction among the students from their study field view. That's allows and encourage the students to participate. Thank you so much. Now Itzel, it's gonna do the.
Thank you, Professor Cahueñas. Thank you, Isabel, for the pronunciation. It's always nice to have someone attempting to do so, and it's really flattering that you would take the time in order to do so. At the beginning of the panel, we said that we were learning how to do online courses, and I did say forcibly because we are forced in a way with COVID-19 pandemic. Tec de Monterrey has had a long history of working of online courses. We were the first university in Latin America and Mexico to have the first IP server. And this has ignited this process. So as you have already seen, we have a lot of already learned experiences on building platforms in order to have collaboration from other sites. And of course, one of the main issues and the main question of this panel is if we can really experience abroad online. I was thinking about the answer for this specific question, and of course, we cannot summarize it in 3 seconds, which is basically what I have left to talk to you. But I can tell you one thing. Abroad is not the abroad of our forefathers. Abroad is the abroad of online today. And of course, that abroad online we can experience through the GNL. It is obvious that we will not have the access to the idiosyncrasies of people living on a day-by-day and in-person experience, but we have had access to experiences and to share, for example, the intercultural communication that it's sometimes not as smooth as we would like to think. No, we did have different working ethics and working timings for different cultures. And I really believe that that also sums up for the intercultural exchange. And students were really keen on this because of the Padlet experiences. But all in all, what we can say is that we can experience abroad online, but the virtual abroad. And the other thing is that it does prepare students in order to become more interested to have interaction with other cultures. If I still have some time, I would like to share with you a little bit of a survey that we did for students. And as you can see, what part of the GNL experience did you like the most? And as you can see consistently, the icebreaker activity, meaning the synchronous activity in Zoom in which they were able to have contact with them and to have exchanges in real time, was of course one of the favorites, alongside with the experts' opinions. And of course, as we can see, we have this also kind of responses very filtered by the kind of institution that we have. So as all in all, what we can conclude is that the abroad that we experience is the online abroad, but for these generations that live 60% of their lives in the virtual reality, we guess that it is a very good experience and a very good starting point in order to start the conversation and the interest for other groups. Thank you so much.
Isabel, that finishes our collective presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. And I have so many questions, but I think we'll wait till after our 2 other presenters. But I love the collaborative aspect of the global network learning. And I'm sure those that are listening, please again, as questions emerge during the presentations, feel free to add that in the chat and we'll go back to them and go to all the presenters. So thank you, that's really exciting actually as an approach. I now will welcome our following presentation from Della Burke, Coordinator of Campus Internationalization, ITESO from the Jesuit University of Guadalajara in Mexico.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Yeah, so I have, great, a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you very much. So this presentation will show how ITESO constructed and is in the process of implementing a comprehensive internationalization strategy, which aims to provide an international experience for 100% of the student body. Next slide, please. The strategy focuses on new initiatives like collaborative online international learning and pre-existing efforts like the International Summer Program, which lead to a culture shift from internationalization meaning only student exchange programs to internationalization being integrated in programs throughout the university. Next slide, please. Using technology and digital learning, internationalization shifts to programming which is purposeful, has a small carbon footprint, and most importantly is inclusive and accessible for all students. Internationalization of the curriculum is key to reaching all students. Next slide, please. And with that, technology and digital learning are imperative for this integration. 3 actions will be discussed in this presentation, which are paramount for successfully implementing internationalization at home at ITESO. The first is to increase COIL, or the globally networked classrooms, or virtual exchange. There are a number of different terms. We'll increase this from a sporadic and professor-initiated project to a coordinated and departmentally guided initiative. And the second is to increase the number of courses taught in English, using English as a medium of instruction pedagogy by training and guiding professors with an interest in EMI. And the third is to take advantage of pivots during the pandemic. These were reasonable shifts in existing programming, including international student research programs and co-teaching programs. These 3 actions draw from the best practices of colleagues and build on our ongoing internationalization activities. Next slide, please. Historically, ITESO has had a very reasonable level of exchange programming, both incoming and outgoing. Before the pandemic, 3.3% of our students were able to participate in an international semester or summer academic program. While this is well above the national average, it leaves 96.7% of students without an immersive international experience. Additionally, the inbound exchange and study abroad mobility at a rate at ITESO has been relatively good for the last 5 years, with 286 foreign students studying at ITESO in 2018. And the numbers had been consistently growing, but they are susceptible to outside circumstances, including a worldwide pandemic. Also, there's an English language requirement for graduation for all undergraduate students, regardless of major, and that was implemented in 2003. So now students must prove a B1/B2 level of English by the time they reach 70% of their degree completion. This has opened doors for professors who want to invite, either virtually or in person, international guest lecturers, or include other internationalization efforts like COIL within their classroom, even if the class is officially taught in Spanish. Next slide, please. And since 2011, ITESO has been an active participant in the dual immersion project of the Jesuit Universities of Latin America, AUSHAL, and of the United States, AJCU. The program focuses on developing linguistic pedagogy and cultural exchange between Spanish and English language classes via digital platforms. The program at ITESO has grown to include universities outside the Jesuit university networks and continues to expand. Finally, the International Summer Program, created in 2012, invites international professors to co-teach a course with an ITESO professor during a 4-week summer program. The courses are offered to ITESO students in Spanish, English, or Spanish and English. In 2019, continuing with a consistent growth pattern, there were 29 courses on offer, and the 2020 program was able to make a quick shift and 16 courses were offered fully online. Expanding on this campus culture, in 2018, ITESO's new incoming rector immediately announced that one of his priorities would be internationalization. He formed the Commission for Internationalization, which was tasked with coming up with a comprehensive plan for internationalization at ITESO. The Commission submitted their plan in July 2019. The implementation of this plan has been both complicated and accelerated due to the effects of the pandemic. Building on known internal initiatives and sharing and adapting best practices with like-minded colleagues has been imperative throughout. Next slide, please. Returning to the 3 key actions identified at the beginning of the presentation. The first is to increase COIL components in ITESO courses from a sporadic and professor-initiated project to a coordinated and departmentally guided initiative. Next slide, please. COIL was an initiative which the Commission for Internationalization identified as key for developing accessible and equitable internationalization at ITESO. And because of this, in January 2020, we began developing an introduction to COIL for our professors and staff. As the pandemic proceeded, we participated in a large number of webinars and also coordinated one-on-one calls with colleagues who were willing and able to share their best practices with us. We joined several networks which were newly organized to promote COIL collaboration, but more importantly, we put together a network of professors on campus who would serve as liaisons for organizing internationalization efforts in their respective departments. These liaisons work to foment internationalization and make communication more agile, and now have an open channel of communication between departments for sharing best practices. Because of this, the interest in COIL collaboration at ITESO has jumped astronomically from 1 or 2 courses that we knew of on offer because of specific professor interest to 6 collaborations in fall 2020 and at least 12 COIL collaborations in spring 2021. Using our networks, inputs from colleagues, and knowledge gained from webinars, we organized our own in-house COIL workshop and held 2 inaugural workshops in fall 2020. 28 professors participated in the 2 workshops, and further workshops are planned for February 2021 and beyond. We announced the workshops about 48 hours ago, and it's already filled. So next slide, please. Next, ITESO put together a plan to increase courses offered in English, using English as a medium of instruction by training and guiding professors with an interest in teaching in English. Increasing our course offerings taught in English opens many more doors for international collaboration, both virtually and in person. We had previously relied on external workshops for training interested professors. However, when we reached out to our sister Jesuit universities in Mexico about their training programs, we realized that we had the capacity to offer the workshop out of our language department, free of charge to our professors. 38 professors signed up for the first workshop. Next slide, please. And finally, ITESO shifted from our previously in-person collaboration to virtual or distanced collaboration during the pandemic. We are yet to see how this shift will change once in-person collaboration is again possible. There are 2 key adaptations to discuss here. The first is an international research program between ITESO and the University of Toronto. The program through the REACH Alliance brought University of Toronto students to ITESO in the summer months to do field research alongside ITESO students with on-site supervision by ITESO faculty. During the spring of 2020, the team met to begin working on a pivot so that the Toronto students would still be able to work at a distance. ITESO faculty would communicate with the students in Toronto and give them information from the field sites, and the Toronto students would work on the methodology and theoretical framework from their homes. This information was then shared with the ITESO students once they were able to return to the field sites during the following semesters. Although the new method of collaboration was developed rapidly and the students worked asynchronously, the University of Toronto group was still able to work at a distance with the ITESO professors. And we're hopeful that for summer 2021, the 2 student groups will be able to work collaboratively, even if at a distance. And the other initiative which made a pivot during the pandemic to online learning was our international summer program. As mentioned, the 2020 program was able to make a quick pivot and 16 courses were offered fully online. Students were extremely interested in enrolling in classes team taught with international professors, and in fact, the class sizes increased. The planning for 2021 is underway and the courses will be taught fully online. We do not doubt that after travel restrictions are lifted, we will want to return to a mostly face-to-face summer program. However, we now have the technological and pedagogical experience to be able to also offer online courses within the international summer program for those international colleagues who cannot travel to Guadalajara for whatever reason. This experience brings us more opportunities for internationalization and widens our scope in direct benefit to our students. Next slide, please. Through these activities, we expect to be able to increase our students' exposure to internationalization on campus and eventually reach our goal of 100% of students being exposed to internationalization activities during their time at ITESO. Next slide, please. I hope this presentation will help the conference participants consider how building on existing resources while utilizing technology and digital learning tools and methodologies can expand a campus culture of internationalization, and how best practices adapted to campus realities can result in a purposeful, sustainable, and equitable internationalization for all students and ease the implementation of a comprehensive internationalization strategy. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to receiving your questions and comments.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it really showcases how the pandemic has really made higher education institutions and universities reactive, but in a positive way, to be very creative. Yeah, that was a great example of thinking about the bigger picture of your campus and co-learning. So thank you so much. Last but not least, I'm happy to introduce our last panelist, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, Secretary General, Association of Indian Universities from India, and very excited to hear what's happening in her area, in her of the world, in terms of online learning and lessons learned.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on this panel. It's a very, very engaging and very exciting panel. So thanks for inviting me. When we talk of India, I am from Association of Indian Universities. And Association of Indian Universities is an association of something like 850 universities. We have something about 1,000 universities in India. We have 1,000 universities and 40,000 colleges. Out of that, 850 are the members of Association of Indian Universities. So I will be speaking from a broad perspective that when COVID struck and everything had to be sort of online and the technology was to be leveraged, so how did we respond? How did we as a country responded to that? So first of all, when this COVID struck and all the universities and colleges were closed, because India was not very much used to online teaching, it was almost a situation where everybody felt that we are stuck, the students as well as the teachers. But then slowly, the situation became normal. But the biggest thing for us was the digital divide, because India is a very diverse country, and there are rich people, there are poor people, there are rural areas, there are backward areas. So there were many places where the network was not there, sufficient bandwidth was not there, and there were many students who didn't have access to the devices. Many students didn't have the mobile phone or the laptop. So that digital divide created a lot of issue within the country, and I'm sure digital divide must be there in most of the countries. So first thing for us, first challenge was us to address that digital divide and spend more on technology rather than brick and mortar structure, because we saw that almost for 1 year now, brick and mortar structures are just lying empty, and the technology is which is helping in running the classes and the online classes. So first thing which we did was to invest on the technology, and now we are investing on technology to ensure that the students get the devices and every institution and the student has sufficient bandwidth as well as the internet connection. So the second challenge which we faced was, again, because I was saying that our teachers were not used to online teaching, the second challenge was capacity building of the teachers, because the teachers didn't know how to teach online. So slowly we ran many courses, online courses on telling teachers how to teach online, which platform to use, how to use different platforms, and how to make effective online teaching, because online teaching is not just sitting in front of camera and speaking. So there has to be many nuances to if you have to have an effective online teaching. So then that was the second step which we took, that we arranged many online classes. Even from AIU, we did partner with many organizations like QuedX, which is a UK firm, that also we partnered. And we made many online courses for the teachers so that they can teach online. And I must compliment our teachers that within no time, they learned how to teach online and it started showing. The third thing which we faced was that when the students were sitting within their homes, they could not do internships. In India now, after the new education policy, we are laying a lot of emphasis on learning by doing rather than classroom teaching, learning by doing, especially in the semester breaks. So internships were affected, placements were affected very badly. But again, there were technological solutions which led to online internships and online placements. Now I come to the internationalization. Now initially, when the COVID struck, everybody thought that this is an end to internationalization, because nobody could travel abroad, nobody could, student exchange couldn't be there, teachers exchange could not be there. But then as it progressed, as the COVID progressed, and in India, we have an issue with, especially with regard to international students, because something like 1 million students go every year out of India to study in various countries. but the number of students who come to India is not more than 46,000 or something, that too only from the neighboring countries. So we do have an issue where we want to attract foreign students. But what we noticed during COVID was that many of these 1 million students who had gone abroad for studying, many of them returned back. And because many universities resorted to online teaching, the students preferred to defer their admissions and defer their classes rather than learning online, because they wanted to experience the university abroad. For example, once we were having a session with Harvard University, and we said that now that India has agreed that 100 foreign universities can set up their campuses in India, I mean 100 top foreign universities in the world ranking. So we asked Harvard, are you going to set up your campus in India? They said, no, we are not going to set up campus not only in India, nowhere in the world, because if you want to experience Harvard, come to Harvard. So similarly, our students felt that if we want to experience foreign or education abroad, it should be by going physically to those campuses rather than learning online from the foreign universities. So many of the students came back, many of them deferred admissions, and therefore I would say that internationalization, COVID has affected the internationalization in terms of flow of international students, and the students are not wanting to learn online and not actually experience the foreign campuses. But in terms of foreign collaborations, whether it is a teacher exchange in the form that, like, now if my university wants to have a lecture from a foreign teacher, it is very easy, it is very cost effective, it is very time effective also, because no time is required in calling a foreign professor and teaching my students online. So that way the student exchange, foreign exchange online was there. But when we talk of students going abroad for studies, that is reducing a bit, or rather students are deferring that admission. So, but internationalization, which we feared will stop, has not stopped, and it is going on, or rather it is becoming more and more because of the cost effectiveness part of it, because it is now cheaper. So collaborations are increasing, international students slowly, I think it will increase. But right now, many of the students have come back, and therefore our government is starting a policy called Stay in India, Study in India, that they should stay back in India and study here rather than going back. So for that, we are also arranging for lateral admission of these students in various universities and colleges in India, because they have studied 2 years abroad, so they can be getting admission to, say, 3rd year or 2nd year in India. So that type of a scenario is there in India. And one more thing which was impacted due to online education was the psychology of the students, the mindset of the students. Because of this, because they could not meet their friends, they could not meet their teachers, there was an issue with regard to their, many of the students started having problems of depression and all. So we did open a lot of counseling centers in the universities to counsel the students. We even had many online cultural programs for the students so that they could give their performances online and they remain engaged. So it was not only academic and research, it was also taking care of the students emotionally and psychologically and personally also. So we are trying our best, and we hope that the situation gets normal very soon and all this ends, because the future is not face-to-face, future is not online, future is blended education. So we have to go in for the blended education. So with that, I would like to finish. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have so much to learn from India as a case study, just because of the size of your country, the diversity of languages and cultures, over 1,000 universities, as you stated. Yeah, there's so many lessons learned for making sure that all students have accessibility. And I love the points that you made in terms of the digital divide and how you address that, and everything else from supporting professors to teach online. So thank you. And thanks for Helen for reminding me that we, exciting news that we have one more presenter. My apologies for not mentioning this at the beginning, but we also have Dr. Miriam Villela, Director from Earth Charter Center on Education for Sustainable Development, University of Peace in Costa Rica. So I will give the floor to her to present, and then after we will engage in a Q&A. So any questions that are coming up, use the chat, and or individually also, and then we'll get back to those questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for everybody. It was very interesting to listen and see the experience that you have had. I'm speaking from our experience in Costa Rica in working with online learning for over 10 years. So I'm based in Costa Rica, although I'm from Brazil, and we work with the Earth Shadow movement, which is a movement that is decentralized, and we have partners all over the world. But we also work from the University for Peace, where we co-host UNESCO chair on education for sustainable development with the Earth Charter. And in 2010, we started working with online short courses for young people on leadership, sustainability, and ethics. And since then, we have just expanded the way in which we use online education platforms. Now, currently, since a year ago, the University for Peace is working with a hybrid mode, which we have students on campus and we have many students off campus, but all taking the same course online. Some online and others face-to-face. This is in a graduate program of a several master programs at the University for Peace that is based in Costa Rica. But I would like just to share the outcomes of my own reflection on the question that was asked in terms of what are the opportunities and limitations of online experience. And I'm sharing this from our experience with a number of online courses on education for sustainability for teachers, educators in primary to secondary schools and higher education, but also with young people. So I think in terms of opportunities from our perspective and our experience is that it has created spaces that bring participants from different contexts and cultures together to exchange experiences and knowledge. Meaning that students that will only normally be together limited to a geographic realm, such as students from Toronto universities or students from Costa Rica, will only exchange, would have only exchanged their knowledge and experiences or interaction in a course in a face-to-face if the course was only in face-to-face. But from our experience, in online learning, we have crossed that kind of limitation, no? And therefore, all our courses have offered that opportunity to bring together participants from diverse contexts and cultures, which amplifies the experience, I think, in terms of bringing together these people from various countries. It has amplified and enriched the experience in terms of looking at a situation from different worldviews. From our experience, it has also allowed us to reach out to a bigger number of people with less cost. It has also offered the opportunity of flexibility with time and also in terms of geographic space. In terms of the limitations that we have seen is that indeed a number of teachers and professors from higher education or primary schools, they are not yet really fully trained to move the content and the experience from a face-to-face interaction to online spaces. I think this is still a limitation in many of the educators, with many of the educators that we have come across, but most of our programs are professional development programs. And therefore, in our perspective, we have been quite successful in how to address that. There is another thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the limitations, given that our courses are offered in Portuguese, in Spanish, and in English. We have seen a difference in our participants in terms of the discipline. I think in terms of online courses, it requires a different kind of discipline from the participant that requires them to be very focused in terms of the time that is required for them to cover what is needed. We also see, but I think less and less nowadays, a limitation on the technology divide, given that access to internet and the appropriate computer varies according to where we are in the world, and also I would say even depending on the age, we have seen that people from an older age group have some more difficulties to address the issues of access to online platforms. But I think all of these limitations have been pretty well addressed over the past years. In a face-to-face environment, it's much easier to build that learning community because the personal connection, the icebreaker activities are easier in a sense. But we have been moving in looking at pedagogical approaches that we can address those, I would say, limitations also in the online learning space. At least from our perspective, we have been experiencing and looking online, it's an ongoing learning of how to address that need for the personal connection and the creation of a learning space, a learning community in the realm of online learning. It just requires a little bit of a bigger effort to create these learning communities in an online space. And therefore, I think over the past 2 years, although we have had kind of 10 years of experience in working with this online learnings in different, again, geographic groups, in Spanish, in Portuguese, and in English. And I think we have addressed a number of these limitations in terms of building a human connection through activities, building a learning community through participatory activities inside their online learning realm. The last point that I wanted to just reflect or highlight in terms of limitation, it has to do with institutional stiffness. And I think from the first presentation we have heard today, a number of these have been addressed. Because what you have done is what we have been trying to do also here is like generating collaboration among different institutions that are geographically located in different places, but can be united in an online learning space with the same course. We have done that with some universities in the Netherlands, and it has been quite successful. I think there's a lot of room to put down the walls of our institutions because they are limited to a geographic place sometimes, but in the online new world, there's no need for that. And I think what it's needed, it's more cross-cultural and across geographic bounds collaboration. And I think there's a lot of room for that. And of course, we have tried to do that from our experience. And we have seen the good experience that has been shared here for that. I think because of time, I would stop here and just express my appreciation for the space for sharing with you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is so interesting. So there's been some great questions coming in the chat. Because of time, because I'm realizing we have about 20 minutes left, and I do want to hear from all the panelists, so I might try to cluster the questions together. So I'm seeing kind of two categories. So one is kind of in terms of the planning of your collaborative online experiences, and then the other one is more about the implementation. So some questions that are coming up in your planning is, you know, how do you in terms of international partners, how do you identify those? There's also been in terms of the co-teaching, a lot of some of your programs, you're collaborating with different other institutions. There's a lot of, we've heard a lot from you about the need for professional development even. It's been clearly indicated that when you're teaching in person in the classroom, it's much different and you just can't transfer over to what you were doing to an online setting. That's not very engaging. So a lot of you are using virtual classrooms and very dynamic tools. So I guess a general question to all of you. So if you were new, or if I'm new in developing collaborative online international learning experiences, what advice would you give me? Where to start? What has been your lesson learned more in the planning process? And then I'll flip to a question more on the implementation, which is the experiential learning experience, and also there was a question about virtual internships experience, like those different levels of how students are engaged. And I love the comments, by the way, about how online learning really requires a different type of discipline, which is very true. So I'm also curious on that aspect of how can we support students succeed with online learning, knowing that it requires more autonomy, more focus, more discipline. So those two questions, if you think in your mind of the pre-planning advice you'd offer, and then the implementation, the tools that you use to make sure that these are positive learning experiences. So I don't know who wants to start. Maybe we can just lift your hand so I can try. Oh, we have Della.
Sure. So I was part of the Commission for Internationalization. I was the chair of the commission. So we did a lot of planning. We were very lucky that our rector mandated this so that we were able to have sort of the excuse to have the time to do the planning. And this was pre-pandemic. Like, we didn't know this was coming, but we had already decided that COIL was going to be important for our comprehensive internationalization plan. One of the things that we realized in the planning was that somebody needed to be the point person, and that point person needed to be in the international office. And I know that for some universities, that's a non-starter, or it was pre-pandemic. It might now be something because physical mobility is shifting. It might be something that is now possible to have someone dedicate a percentage of, we don't have a full-time staff person as COIL. We have a portion of a staff time as COIL coordination. And the other thing was to really lean into those networks that you already have. So since we're part of a Jesuit network, we leaned into those Jesuit networks to see, like, what's the knowledge that's already there? And then try and figure out, how does that adapt? One of the other things that we did was we leaned into our colleagues who we knew had already done this. So we knew that the University of Monterrey had already gone through this. We'd had discussions with them. They're Mexican. They're about the same size as us. It doesn't help me much to contact my colleagues at Tech because their university is so different from ours. Even though we're both private universities, they have a completely different setup. But we found that at UDEM, the University of Monterrey, they're similar size to us. They're also private. But it's important to acknowledge that the majority of, well, the Latin American universities here represented, we're private institutions. It's a completely different field when you look at the public institutions in Latin America and their abilities to really step into these collaborative online international learning projects. And so that was something that we did. We leaned on our networks, we leaned on our colleagues, and we, looked for friendly faces where we could find them, and borrowed from that, understanding what the translation from their context to our context would be. I think that's the way forward.
Great, thank you. And I think, Miriam, you had something to add, and then James.
Yes, on the discipline question, which was something that I have raised too, because I have seen that many of the participants of our courses sometimes lag behind because people are used to go to a university, to go physically to a place every Tuesday or every Wednesday at a certain time. And although the online learning gives us a bigger opportunity to be flexible, if someone is not flexible or not disciplined enough, they can easily get lag behind because they forget to go and do what they need to do every week to cover what is required for their sessions. So I give you just a very concrete example from a course that is going on in Brazil now that we are part of. We collaborate with an NGO in Brazil that is offering a climate change course through the lenses of the Earth Charter. And there were 1,000 people registered for that. We accepted about 400 participants, and how to make that happen in a way that we can actually create a learning community. So we have plenary sessions that we have these 400 people together in one plenary, but most of the work is done in small groups. And in small groups online with people from different geographic places in Brazil, that has a facilitator that is really taking care of 20 people in like the groups, the 400 people are divided in groups of 20 people. And there's one or two, sometimes even facilitator that is really closely looking and taking care of 20 people. So they know their names and they have more time to come together. So I think it's kind of this, again, this human connection, even in an online space, that makes a lot of difference, you know, because you have a sense of ownership when someone is really waiting for you. You're not just invisible there in a group of 100 or 400 people. What you have to say to a group of 20 people that is actually also subdivided sometimes in groups of 4 makes you really have a sense of belonging to the process and not be just behind the scenes and in a more passive way. So this is just one example of a way in which we have been addressing that need of discipline and the need for strengthening the human connection, even in this virtual space.
Thank you. I love that concrete example of the need for the smaller breakout groups because of the accountability aspect. Like when you're a student, if you have nobody that's accountable, that's checking in, it's true that it's hard to, so that's such a great concrete example of how to do large scale with so many students and bring it down to a tangible, more personal learning experience. James, you also wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make some comments on some of those questions that were raised, but I'm going to draw on my own personal experience. I'm a novice online instructor. I don't have a long history in terms of teaching online. And how I identified my partners, I really have to give the credit to the GNL initiative at York University. They had an information session. I attended it just out of curiosity, incidentally. And the next thing, you know, one thing led to another. I met my community partners. They were open to this collaborative effort. And if it wasn't for the GNL actually initiating this, I think that's really important, and nurturing and fostering it throughout, then it likely wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been able to identify the partners. So I think having some sort of organization within our institutions that can really develop and nurture those partnerships is really important for individual instructors. In terms of implementing it, what's also important is having regular meetings where you really talk about how you're going to put the sessions together. And I think that's very important. But all of us, all of the individual instructors really have to be open to whatever suggestions others are making. If you're going in with a preset idea in terms of how to deliver to your student, you have to listen to your colleagues and work with them together. And I think that's one of the real keys in terms of implementing it. And the other thing I want to say that in terms of my own personal experiences, it's really bringing the three institutions together is really not, there's a kind of synergy that develops between institutions and across all of the three institutions. And I would say what comes out of this collaboration is more than the sum of its parts. It's really multiplied. And I think that's one of the great benefits of this. And I'll leave that open to my other colleagues. But my sense is that what I've been able to offer my students, I couldn't do that, even in a face-to-face session. There's no way I can bring instructors from other countries. I mean, I can do that individually, but as guest speakers, bring them in one at a time. But to have a collaboration where you're bringing in instructors, experts from other countries together, particularly on a topic like refugees and forced migration, which is by its very nature, of course, international in scope, gives the students an entirely different view of things. So I think these kinds of GNL collaborations create a synergy, and the outcome in terms of the learning experience for the students itself is many more times multiplied than what you could do in person.
Thanks. I love the point about how it's really a collaborative approach with you and the other instructors, and the energy you even have to do when planning with other instructors. And again, I guess the point that James made was similar to Della in terms of the key of having the institutional support from your university or higher education institution to bring the dots together, the relationships with other institutions, and just the sharing. And it was mentioned by many of you as well, the professional development opportunities or training offered to professors and instructors in using this approach. I'd like to go focus more on the implementation now. I guess a few sub-questions on implementation. There's a few questions around addressing intercultural development and intercultural competencies. So while students are learning, I guess there's also a planning around that, but really also how to foster that, and also how do we evaluate that. And then I also like the specific about the virtual internship experience that was brought up earlier, that we might ask Pankaj from India, who had mentioned that as one of the components. Maybe I'll ask you to start by sharing some of your experience about that hands-on learning experience. How do you do that virtually? And then we can open up to other implementation and the intercultural development.
Okay. Thank you. I'll tell about the internships. See, in India, generally internships were compulsory for the professional courses. But now, after this new education policy, it is mentioned that every course, whatever, whether it is humanities, social sciences, languages, every course should be having an internship after every semester, so that the students have hands-on experience of whatever they are learning in the classroom. Now, because of this COVID, these internships, students could not go to those places and do the internships. So what we resorted to was the virtual internship. So I'll take example of, say, law. So in law, mostly the students used to go to the law firms or the lawyers and learn how to basically work in the courts. But then when the COVID struck and the courts were also closed, our students used to go to the law firms, not actually, but virtually. They used to give opinions online, because the law firms used to tell them that do research on those things, and they used to do research online and give it back to the law firm. And then most of our courts were working online. So advocates were virtually appearing before the judge was also appearing virtually, and the many matters were decided. Rather, it was a much faster approach, and then many more cases were resolved during the pandemic. So these interns, they could see the actual proceeding of the court, because it was held online. Otherwise, it was difficult for everybody to go to Supreme Court, which is only, it is in Delhi, and the students are from all over the country. So the students could actually witness the proceedings of the courts sitting at their home. So these type of virtual internships took place in India during the pandemic, and I really feel that even when the pandemic goes away, these virtual internships will remain, maybe not only virtual, but then virtual plus face-to-face in a blended mode.
That's great, thank you. And I think that was brought up by many other panelists too, the hybrid model, that we're not going to go back. There's lessons learned, and how do we go forward using that? Does anyone want to address the question around intercultural competencies and intercultural development, and how do we be conscious of that in our planning and implementation for students learning? Oh, Della and Ista and
Itzel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has been a challenge for us. And I want to make very clear that while, my presentation was 10 minutes, the actual project is so much more than 10 minutes long. So this is challenging for us. What we have done is adapted a methodology developed by our sister universities that that was in Spanish already. And so we were able to easily work with our professors about it. And we've done a lot of emphasis about how the International Office can support them in the icebreaker and also the reflection part of the activities. Because many professors have come to us quite nervous about the fact that, we have had a lot of interest from our engineering faculty, but once we start talking to them about, icebreaker activities and reflection pieces and things like that, they think it's a little touchy-feely for them and they need support. And so we've tried to support them in that sense. We would love to be able to implement something like an IDI pre and post course. It is unfeasible for us to have that kind of expense, especially right now. And we've looked into it. We tried to figure out how, and we tried to look at, the cost and the benefit and all these things. It's untenable for us to put out that kind of money right now for during this time. And we don't see how it's going to be possible in the future either. And it is something that some of our colleagues have done. Some of them have charged their own students for the IDI costs, but we can't do that. So we're trying to figure out a way to do it ourselves. We're looking at reflection pieces by students pre and post experience. And then we're going to have to figure out a way to evaluate them ourselves. So that is challenging, particularly when it combines with economic complications. And so that's something that we need to figure out.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I will give the last word to Itzel, as I think we have to wrap up soon, but any last comments before we join the closing keynote?
Thank you so much for the floor. I agree with Della that there are some issues to evaluating correctly intercultural learning. In another panel in which there was the implementation part, the academic management part, yesterday actually in panel 3, we were actually discussing that the fact that measuring intercultural development is a very difficult thing to do, and it is something that you do not usually observe after the GNL experience or the Quail experience, but sometime after, and even like in a lifelong experience. But since we are in a practitioner's standpoint, I would like to share with you a specific example on how we solved that. And that was basically done by giving or providing students with something that we call previous materials that I hope that you're actually seeing on your screen. We did this infographic by comparing refugee management systems from Canada, Ecuador, and Mexico, because that was a topic of our GNL. And of course, making a reflection about why there were so many differences in this management. And of course, whenever you are talking about institutional differences, it's bound to lead to the conversation of cultural differences, because institutions are never voided or devoided of cultural impact. So of course, by starting our discussion from the institutional standpoint of the managing of refugee status for the 3 countries. We then started talking about the difference of institutions, and those differences in institutions can be traced back logically to our historical and cultural differences. So of course, from that standpoint, something formal becomes or trickles down to the informality of everyday life and how societies organize themselves differently. So you can start by a very academic and specific concept and then trickle it down through using, for example, the collaborative tools, like, for example, Hugo mentioned. Because of time, we were not able to go in depth to the GNL actual topic. We just talked about the implementation of it. But as you could see in the Padlet responses, and you were unable to read those, obviously, but there were several mentions of why there was such a difference between the 3 countries. And we guess that because of that particular experience, people started to notice the intercultural experiences and also the logic that separates, but also the logic that unites, because in the infographic, we were able to see both differences and coincidences. And I think that that's a very down-to-earth, practical example on how to implement intercultural education. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. It was very informative and very inspiring for the work that you're doing. I do think now we need to switch to attend the closing keynote adoption for the conference and the conference declaration. Pooja or someone from the conference organizers, I know there was also a cultural contributions. Do we have time to play this? Is this in this room or in the main room? I don't know if someone from the conference organizers can answer that question.
I think we should head over to the closing ceremony. They're going to get started. And the cultural segment is probably 5 to 10 minutes. I don't want others to miss the closing part. So we can make our way to the closing ceremony. That's fine. And we'll all meet there.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, see you at the other session. Thanks everyone again.
Thank you, Isabel, and everyone else.
Yeah, nice to meet you virtually.
Everyone.
Thank you, it was a pleasure. Bye.